All right, so let's get into this. What's going on here with the real court and the use of the Emergencies Act? So we all know, we all were watching the Emergencies Act Commission with Justice Paul Ralao, and he came to his conclusion that the invocation was justified. And we had back and forth on who this Justice Paul Ralao really was. Was he related to Justin Trudeau? I'm not convinced he was, just because it's hard to find that out. What I do know is that he's a liberal, handpicked judge by Trudeau. So that's worrisome just off the get-go. And I know that he was in John Turner's pocket back in the day. So from the very start of that whole Emergencies Act Commission, I was always skeptical and never had faith. But what I was looking forward to during it was the opportunity to present our side of the story, the trucker side of the story, the organizer side of the story, which I think it was. It was a great opportunity. And Paul Ralao actually said that at the beginning of the hearings. He said this is I think he said a truth-seeking operation or something along those lines. So to me, if that's your goal, to just truth seeks, then I don't see, and if your decision at the end of the day as a justice bears no weight and is not binding at all, I don't see the point in coming out with your opinion on it, because that's essentially all we saw was Paul Ralao's opinion. So it wasn't very useful. So what's happening right now is a real federal court is looking at this. And so I watched an interview with Clyde Do Something and a lawyer named, I think her name is Eva Chipiuk. Anyway, she's a lawyer, and she kind of explained how this is different from the commission, and she explained that this is actual. This will actually be very binding because it's a federal court. It's not like a lawsuit where it's just two parties arguing against each other in terms of loss or of work or injury. But it's essentially when you go to a judge to specifically review a law made by the government. And according to her, she said you have only 30 days to go to court and challenge the law. And so that was filed in March of last year. So in March of last year, it was filed before the revocation. And so essentially this case is asking this judge, which, by the way, my understanding is this judge, he mentioned that he's an ex-trucker. So that'll be interesting. And I actually encourage you to go over and support Clyde Do Something. I don't want to rip him off, but watch that interview. It's very, very interesting. But I want to point out something interesting that this Eva woman pointed out that this judge had said, because these government lawyers, and we hear this all the time, they bring forward this MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, that the truckers had, right? And so they use that as evidence that the truckers weren't going away and that they were demanding their voices to be heard. And they use this against this judge. And apparently this judge said, you know what? We're not even looking at that. He said, all that is, if anything, is the lack of education in how our law works. So it's interesting that this judge has that attitude. Oh, his name is Justice Richard Mosley. So he's an older fella, Canadian federal court trial judge who has background in national security interests and has taken a role in hearing a number of Canadian anti-terrorism cases, including blah, blah, blah. Okay, so I like his attitude so far. I like the fact that he was a trucker in his time. At least that's my understanding. I was watching Global News in response to this real court that's taking a look at this and answering those questions. I don't want to watch the video. I watched this morning. It's very tainted. This guy's he's like cheerleading for Paul Ralao, saying, "Oh yeah, he made the right decision." Blah blah blah. So a national civil liberties group told a federal judge Monday the federal government has not clearly spelled out proper legal justification for its use of the Emergencies Act, early last year in response to protests in the national capital and at key border points. The Canadian Civil Liberties Association was among the groups and individuals in federal court to argue Ottawa lacked sound statutory grounds to invoke the emergency measures. The government contends the measures taken to deal with the pan-Canadian emergency situation were targeted, proportional, time-limited, and compliant with the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. They weren't. They weren't at all. In fact, the guy who wrote the darn thing, was saying that it wasn't. So, yeah, this whole article is pretty slanted. The Public Order Emergency Commission, a mandatory review that takes place after invocation of the Emergencies Act, found the government met the very high threshold for using the law. Well, of course you did. Of course you did, because you hand-selected a judge. That's we didn't expect anything otherwise. At least I didn't. Now, the legal arguments for and against the decision are being heard in a court of law. The 3-day hearing began Monday with the federal government's reasons why the matter should not be in court at all, given that the emergency measures have been revoked. Why is that their argument? This whole, it's moot, like, it's in the past. Like, if you murder someone and say, that was yesterday, I didn't murder him today, like, that's not even an argument, and it's the ultimate gaslighting, I think. Justice Richard Mosley, there he is, intends to rule at a later date on that point and proceed with hearing the arguments of the various parties on the merits of the overall case. The influx, including some participants with roots in the far-right movement, that's us guys apparently, prompted many businesses to shut their doors and aggravated residents. So listen to the language. If you're trying to be a journalist and get the objective point of view here, which it's just so clear that they're not, they're using language like aggravated residents with noise pollution and harassing behavior. Now, was there instances of harassing? Now, I saw and I heard about stories, and I can see that it being a reality because I've met them here locally. Like at my own City Hall flag gathering, protest, whatever you want to call it, last winter, we had a gentleman say some comments to someone just walking by saying, "Why are you wearing that mask?" And he was nice about it, but at the same time, my attitude is leave them alone. If they want to wear a mask, let them. I can see people feeling that as harassment. So was that type of stuff going on? I wouldn't call it harassment because, what's the definition of harassment? Let's look that up. What does it mean exactly? Harassment is a form of discrimination. Okay, that fits. It includes any unwanted physical or verbal behavior that offends or humiliates you. Okay. Generally, harassment is behavior that persists over time. Serious one-time incidents can also sometimes be considered harassment. Okay. All right. So I would say that definitely counts. Let's not harass people on the sidewalk. Other than that, which it's not against the law to tell people to not follow along with the false narratives. Like the guy that I saw, he was very sweet about it. His tone of voice was very polite. And it was like he was trying to engage the person, like, why are you wearing that? Like, he was curious. So just imagine a little bit of a more zealous freedom fighter who was already out yelling and screaming with a flag, and then mixing that in with a comment towards someone like that. I could see how that could easily get out of hand. But again, for the most part, we all know it was a huge, peaceful protest. It was a party. It was a celebration, which we'll get into. Terry, this is getting tiring. They've gone over this time after time by now. The libs are still screwing us in other ways. Let's move on to that. Well, what are you referring to? The whole situation, or because this is actually pretty big news that a federal court is now looking at it, because the Emergency Act Commission, it really was just a truth-seeking operation. It was just to get the stories out there. And then obviously the commissioner gives his advice. So to me, this is the fact that a federal judge is now asking the question, did they follow the criteria necessary to evoke it? Now, this is the one that's binding. So that'll be interesting. And it seems, just based on what I've heard the judge say, is that he's being pretty fair. He's being pretty level-headed about it. I'll put it that way. I shouldn't say fair because I haven't seen too much. He's being pretty level-headed just with the things he's saying. And one of the things that I liked from Keith Wilson, it was in his response to, I believe it was CBC, maybe CTV. They were interviewing him after the results of the commission came out. They wanted a response from him. And one of the things he said, it always mind baffled him that they never filed an injunction. Like, remember when they filed an injunction to stop the horns during the protest? Apparently, and I didn't know this was possible, but you can actually file an injunction for them to leave. So why that was never done, and it's beyond me, but that just goes to show me that there were steps that could have been taken before they did what they did. And so that's what this judge is going to be looking at, is did they meet the criteria? And that criteria makes sure that they cover all their bases first before coming to this very serious and essentially unprecedented move to evoke the Emergencies Act.